The grand hall buzzed with electric anticipation. Cameras flashed, microphones stood ready, and reporters filled every seat as they awaited the arrival of President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump. The event was supposed to be a routine press conference, announcing new programs to support struggling families, but the routine shattered the moment a young reporter, Daniel Pierce, rose to speak. His voice, sharp and trembling with frustration, cut through the hushed room. "Mr. President, Mrs. Trump," he began, "how can you talk about helping families when my own family was left to fall apart?" A ripple of gasps moved across the crowd. Reporters exchanged uneasy glances, unsure if Daniel's bold interruption would get him escorted out. Security tightened, awaiting the president's cue. Trump paused, his expression unreadable. Melania tilted her head slightly, studying the young man. Unlike the polished questions of seasoned journalists, Daniel's words carried unfiltered pain. The audience braced for Trump's famously sharp reply, but instead, the president surprised everyone. "What happened to your family?" he asked calmly. The room went silent. Reporters weren't supposed to become the story, but here was the president inviting one to share his own. Daniel hesitated, the weight of countless cameras pressing down on him. "My father was a veteran," he said, his voice cracking. "He died waiting for care that never came. My mother, she lost everything trying to keep us afloat. And now you stand here promising no family will be forgotten." The silence grew heavier. No one had expected the conference to begin like this. Daniel had been a reporter for only 2 years. Yet the burden of his past shadowed every press room he entered. He hadn't planned to speak out today, but when he heard the words "no family left behind," something inside him snapped. Cameras zoomed in on his trembling hands and flushed face. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This was a son's grief breaking through the noise. Trump leaned forward slightly. "You said your father was a veteran. What branch did he serve in?" Daniel swallowed hard. "The Navy, 22 years. A flicker of recognition crossed Trump's face. He glanced at Melania, who gave him a small, understanding nod. The First Lady's voice softened the tension. "I'm so sorry for your pain," Melania said gently. "Your father gave his service, and your family should have been cared for." But Daniel shook his head bitterly. "Sorry doesn't bring him back. Sorry doesn't help my mom, who works 2 jobs just to keep food on the table." The air thickened again. Critics expected Trump to lash out, to call the reporter disrespectful. Instead, his next words shocked everyone. "Where is your mother now?" Caught off guard, Daniel blinked. "She lives in Ohio, barely hanging on." Trump straightened. "Maybe it's time we pay her a visit." The press room erupted in confusion. A visit from the president? No one expected that, not even Daniel. Cameras flashed wildly as reporters whispered furiously, wondering if this was political theater or something real. "You can't be serious," Daniel managed. "I'm very serious," Trump replied firmly. "If your mother represents families who feel forgotten, then I want to see it for myself. I want to hear her story." Melania placed a steady hand on his arm. "We will go together," she added, her calm yet resolute tone silencing the murmurs. I didn't do this for attention," Daniel stammered. Trump smirked faintly. "You shouted in front of every camera in America. I think you wanted to be heard. Well, now you will be." The press conference ended abruptly. News anchors scrambled to draft headlines. Reporter confronts president, receives personal invitation. Back in the hallway, Daniel leaned against a wall, heart racing. Fellow reporters offered either AOD pats on the shoulder or sharp warnings about crossing professional lines. His phone buzzed, non-stop calls from his editor, texts from strangers, and a single message from his mother. "Daniel, what have you done?" He stared at the screen, torn between fear and relief. For the first time, his voice had truly pierced the noise. But what if it all went wrong? What if the president's visit only made things worse? That night, Daniel lay awake, his mind spinning between disbelief and panic. He had confronted the President of the United States, and instead of punishment, he received a promise. His editor called near midnight. "Do you realize what you've started? Every outlet is running your face. Some call you a hero. Others say you're reckless." "I didn't plan it," Daniel muttered. "It just came out. Doesn't matter. If Trump actually shows up in Ohio, you'll be at the center of a national story." After hanging up, Daniel dialed his mother. Grace Pierce answered, her voice tired. "Mom," he said softly, "they might come. The President and First Lady." Silence. Then, a weary sigh. "Daniel, please tell me this isn't a cruel joke. I've been through enough. It's not a joke. I don't know what will happen, but I think they're serious." Grace's voice trembled with quiet strength. "I don't need a spectacle. I just wanted your father's sacrifice to mean something." Her words pierced Daniel deeper than anything else. This wasn't about politics or attention. It was about honor, dignity, and healing. The next morning, the White House confirmed it. Trump and Melania would travel to Ohio in 3 days. The nation buzzed with debate. Supporters praised the move as empathy in action. Critics dismissed it as a publicity stunt. But for Daniel, it was personal. His mother's worn-down house and their painful story would soon be on full display. He feared what truths might surface when the world came knocking. News spread quickly through the small Ohio town. The President and First Lady were coming not for a rally, not for a staged event, but to Grace Pierce's modest home. Neighbors peeked over fences, gossiping. Some offered to help tidy the yard, others scoffed, calling it all a political performance. Grace remained calm but weary. As she scrubbed her old kitchen counters, she muttered to herself, if they want to see how we live, then let them see it honestly. Daniel arrived 2 days ahead of the scheduled visit, his footsteps heavy as he stepped onto the familiar creaking porch. A wave of guilt tightened his chest. Mom, I never meant for all this to fall on you, he said quietly. Grace offered a faint, tired smile. You spoke up because you're your father's son. He always said the truth should be spoken, even if your voice shakes. The day before the visit, the quiet Ohio neighborhood transformed. Secret Service agents swarmed the streets, setting up barricades as neighbors pressed against them for a better view. Media vans lined the sidewalks. Satellite dishes pointed to the sky. The small town had suddenly become the center of America's attention. Inside the modest Pierce home, Grace carefully folded her late husband's Navy flag and placed it neatly on the coffee table. You really want them to see that? Daniel asked softly. Yes, she replied firmly. Not the broken plumbing or the peeling paint. I want them to see what truly matters, what we lost. Daniel's throat tightened. Tomorrow would change everything, for better or worse. The next morning, the air buzzed with restless anticipation. Helicopters thumped overhead as black SUVs rolled into the neighborhood. Residents lined the sidewalks, waving flags and holding handmade signs, some welcoming, others critical. When the doors of the motorcade opened, President Trump stepped out first, his expression unusually solemn. First Lady Melania followed, offering a graceful wave to the crowd. Daniel stood frozen on the porch beside his mother. Grace wore a simple dress, her graying hair neatly tied back, her eyes steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. Trump climbed the steps, extending his hand. Mrs. Pierce, thank you for letting us come. Grace met his handshake with quiet strength. I didn't invite you, Mr. President, she said evenly, but since you're here, you'll see the truth of how families like mine live. Her directness startled the staff and reporters outside, but Trump nodded with a surprising respect. Melania stepped forward, her voice gentle. We are honored to be here. May we come inside? Grace led them into the small living room. Secret Service agents lined the walls, while cameras peeked through the windows. But the heart of the room was a single folded flag resting at the center. The air grew still. This was no longer politics. It was deeply personal. The house spoke volumes on its own. Faded photographs lined the walls. The worn couch sagged with age, and the scent of old wood carried decades of memories. Grace motioned toward the flag. This belonged to my husband, James Pierce, she said steadily. He served 22 years in the Navy. He died waiting for care from a VA hospital that failed him. Trump stared at the flag, his lips pressed into a tight line. Reporters outside strained to capture the moment, but no microphone could convey the heavy silence inside. Grace continued, her voice strong but layered with grief. I worked double shifts after he died. My son tried to build a life, but the weight of it nearly crushed us. Families like mine stay invisible till we shout loud enough to be noticed. Daniel looked down, torn between shame and pride. Trump finally spoke. You shouldn't have had to shout. This shouldn't happen to veterans or their families. Melania's eyes glistened as she gently touched the folded flag. He gave everything, and you were left with nothing. That is not right. Grace's voice wavered for the first time. I don't need pity, Mrs. Trump. I need promises to mean something. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Trump cleared his throat, his voice lower than usual. Mrs. Pierce, I'll be honest. Too many families have stories like yours. It's unacceptable. Grace crossed her arms. Then why hasn't it changed? Why are widows like me still forgotten? Daniel braced for Trump's trademark defensiveness. Instead, the president leaned in slightly. Because Washington forgets faces, he admitted. It deals in numbers, statistics, votes, but it forgets the people living those numbers. That's why I wanted to see you in person, not read about you in a report. The sincerity in his tone startled Daniel. This wasn't the fiery politician he had confronted, it was a man facing uncomfortable truth. Melania added softly, when you told your story, you spoke for many others. Pain has a way of cutting through the noise. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I just don't want my father's sacrifice to be wasted. Trump placed a hand gently on the folded flag. It won't be, not if I can help it. Grace searched his face, skeptical, yet moved. Words are easy, Mr. President. Action is harder. Trump met her gaze squarely. Then hold me accountable. You have my word. The room went silent. Outside, the press waited impatiently, but inside something rare was unfolding. When Trump and Melania finally stepped back onto the porch, the crowd surged with shouted questions. Instead of heading straight for the motorcade, Trump raised his hand. I want to hear from the neighbors, he said. Reporters scrambled as residents hesitated, then stepped forward. An elderly man spoke first. My brother served in Vietnam. He died before the VA approved his benefits. A young mother added tearfully, I work 3 jobs, and my husband's medical bills keep piling up. We feel forgotten too. Trump listened, nodding more than speaking. Melania offered quiet touches of comfort to those who grew emotional. For once, it wasn't a rally or a staged Q&A. It was raw, unscripted testimony spilling into the open. Daniel watched from the porch, stunned. His impulsive outburst had set something larger into motion. Grace leaned close and whispered, "See, your father's voice lives on in theirs." The crowd swelled with stories of unpaid bills, lost homes, and broken systems. Instead of brushing them aside, Trump absorbed each account, jotting notes and asking questions. The media had come expecting fireworks. Instead, they witnessed something far more unexpected. As the stories slowed, Trump finally raised his hand. The murmurs died down. "These stories are powerful," he said firmly. "Too powerful to ignore. I can't fix everything overnight, but I promise you this. Your voices will not be buried in paperwork. I will make sure your stories are heard where decisions are made." Some clapped cautiously. Others remained skeptical, but no one doubted the weight in his voice. Melania stepped forward, her voice calm yet strong. "Hope begins when someone listens." The crowd hushed as Grace's steady voice cut through the late afternoon air. "Words mean little without action. Mr. President," she said clearly enough for everyone to hear, "we will hold you to your promise." The onlookers erupted in agreement. Trump nodded, meeting the challenge without hesitation. "Good," he replied, "that's how it should be." Daniel's chest tightened. He had braced for anger or dismissal, but instead he witnessed something unexpected, something he wasn't ready to fully trust, yet couldn't ignore. As the motorcade prepared to leave, Trump turned back to him. "Your shout may have been loud," he said, "but it was necessary. Sometimes the truth needs to break the silence." Daniel swallowed hard, realizing for the first time that his impulsive outburst might have carried real purpose. The visit dominated headlines. Some praised the president and first lady for their compassion. Others condemned it as political theater. Social media split in two, debating whether the moment was genuine or staged. Daniel suddenly found himself at the center of a national storm. Strangers flooded his inbox, some thanking him for speaking out, others accusing him of being a pawn. At work, his editor sighed. "You've become part of the story, Daniel. That's dangerous for a journalist." "I didn't ask for this," Daniel protested. "Maybe not," the editor said, "but you can't undo it. The question is, what will you do with the attention?" Meanwhile, Grace endured reporters camped outside her modest home. "I wanted your father's memory honored, not a circus," she told Daniel one evening, her voice cracking. He hugged her tightly. "I know, Mom, but maybe this chaos can lead to something real." Privately, though, Daniel wrestled with doubt. What if his shout had been a mistake? What if nothing changed? Then one night, scrolling through messages, he paused at a note from a widow in Texas. "Thank you. Because of you, I finally told my story." For the first time, Daniel understood. This was no longer about him. A week later, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Hesitant, he answered. "Daniel, this is President Trump." Daniel nearly dropped the phone. Yes, sir. "I've been thinking about your family," Trump said. "We're forming a task group to address veteran family care, and I'd like you and your mother to join the first meeting." Daniel froze. "Me, I'm just a reporter," Trump chuckled. "You're more than that. You're the reason this started. And your mother's perspective, that's the truth Washington needs to hear." Daniel's throat tightened. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Trump replied. "And let's do something about this together." That evening, Daniel shared the news with his mother. Grace's eyes widened. "Daniel, this is bigger than us." "I know," he whispered, "but maybe Dad's voice will finally reach Washington." Grace placed a hand over his. "Then we must go for him, and for others like him." In that moment, Daniel realized the shout he once regretted had become a spark for change. 2 weeks later, Daniel and Grace arrived in Washington, escorted to the White House. Grace, dressed simply but with quiet dignity, looked both nervous and resolute. Daniel carried his notebook, unsure whether he was there as a journalist or as a son. Inside a private meeting room, Trump greeted them warmly, Melania at his side. Around the table sat veterans advocates, healthcare officials, and policymakers. "This isn't about politics," Trump began. "It's about fixing what's broken." Grace spoke first, her voice calm but firm. "Families like mine can't wait for promises. We need systems that work when they're supposed to." The room fell silent, listening to the quiet authority of lived experience. Daniel added stories he had gathered from across the country. His words were no longer an angry outburst. They were measured, purposeful. Trump nodded. "This is what Washington forgets: real people, real pain." "That ends now," Melania added softly. "Compassion is not weakness. It is strength." The meeting stretched late into the evening. For the first time, Daniel felt a cautious hope that change might actually follow. News of the gathering spread quickly. Supporters praised the Pierce's involvement. Critics called it a publicity stunt. But letters and emails poured in from families nationwide, thanking them for speaking up. Grace read one aloud to Daniel. "My husband died, waiting for help, too. Thank you for being our voice." Daniel realized he had become an unwitting representative for countless unheard families. The weight was heavy, but it carried meaning. One night on the porch, Daniel asked, Do you think Dad would believe all this? Grace smiled sadly. Your father believed in speaking up, even when it was unpopular. He would be proud, you shouted. Daniel gazed at the stars. I thought I was ruining everything, but maybe it was the beginning. Far away, during a rally, Trump told the crowd. A young reporter reminded me that sometimes the truth comes from the most unexpected places. Andy changed me. The audience cheered, but those words were meant for the Pierces. Weeks later, Grace received a letter bearing the presidential seal. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Mrs. Pierce, your husband's service will not be forgotten. Because of your courage to share your story, we are creating new initiatives for veteran families. His sacrifice will live on in the changes we make. Thank you for reminding us what truly matters. Donald J. Trump tears streamed down Grace's cheeks. She handed the letter to Daniel. I never thought we'd see this day. Daniel read it silently, his heart swelling with grief, pride, and a strange, healing relief. His father's memory wasn't fading, it was driving change. That night, Daniel sat at his desk and wrote an article not as a reporter chasing headlines, but as a son. The day I shouted at the president, I thought I was only venting pain. Instead, it became the day my father's voice reached the highest office in the land. The piece went viral. Families shared their stories. Advocacy groups invited Daniel to speak. At first, he resisted. I'm not a public figure, he told his mother. Grace reminded him, your father didn't wear a uniform for himself. He wore it for others. Maybe your voice is the same. Reluctantly, Daniel agreed to speak at a veterans gathering. Standing before hundreds, he trembled at first, then lifted his father's folded flag. This isn't just my story, he said. It's ours and it matters. The audience rose in applause. Veterans saluted. Widows wept. Daniel felt a new strength take hold. His voice was no longer powered by anger, but by love, honor, and the drive to create change. The ripple spread. Bills were drafted in Congress. Policies began to shift. And though politics remained messy, one truth stood clear. The forgotten were no longer invisible. Months later, Grace received another unexpected call, this time from Melania Trump. I wanted to thank you personally. Melania said warmly, your grace and honesty have touched me deeply. I'm working on an initiative for families like yours. Grace was moved. Mrs. Trump, I'm no one special. I'm just a mother trying to survive. That, Melania replied softly, is what makes you extraordinary. The quiet strength of mothers sustains nations. Grace hung up, tears in her eyes. She really listened. She whispered. Daniel smiled. Sometimes the world surprises you. Later, Melania mentioned Grace in a speech, calling her a symbol of resilience. Without seeking attention, Grace became an inspiration nationwide, a reminder that dignity and courage can spark change. Months passed. The pain of loss never fully left Grace, but it softened into purpose. She began volunteering with a local veterans support group, comforting widows and guiding struggling families. Daniel often joined her, listening to stories, taking notes not for headlines, but for healing. One evening, as they walked home, Grace whispered, for the first time in years, I feel your father's spirit at peace. Daniel's eyes glistened. I think he's proud of us. Mom, the small town that once saw them as just another struggling family, now greeted them as symbols of hope. Their home remained modest, still creaking and weathered, but inside it glowed with new meaning. For Daniel, the shout that once felt like a reckless mistake had become a bridge from grief to healing, from silence to change. Nearly a year later, Trump and Melania returned to Ohio, this time without cameras or fanfare. They sat quietly on Grace's porch like old friends. Trump handed her a folder. Mrs. Pierce, I wanted you to see this new funding for veteran families. Signed into law. Grace flipped through the pages, her hands trembling. You kept your word. Trump nodded. Because you kept me accountable. Melania added softly. Your story became a light for many others. Grace turned to Daniel, eyes shining. Your father's voice lives on through us. Through this, Daniel swallowed hard, overwhelmed. For the first time, the visit wasn't about politics. It was about friendship, respect, and healing. Years later, Daniel would look back on that single, impulsive moment, the day he shouted in anger, grief, and desperation. What once felt like a reckless mistake had become the spark that ignited lasting change. His mother grew into a quiet advocate. His father's memory lived on, not just in a folded flag, but in action. Policies shifted. Families were supported. Lives were touched. When Daniel shared his story at events, he always ended the same way. I shouted because I was broken. But sometimes broken voices carry the loudest truth. Don't be afraid to speak. You never know who might be listening. The audience always fell silent, reflecting. Trump and Melania. Unexpected response to one man's outburst had turned pain into progress. And the Pierce family once forgotten proof that even the smallest voice can shake the highest walls. In the end, it was never about politics. It was about humanity, something no one expected, but everyone needed to remember.